Della Hargrove was 58 years old, and she stood at the marble counter of Meridian Savings and Loan in her cleaning clothes. Gray smock, sensible shoes, a scarf over her hair from the morning's work. On the cold stone in front of her, she stacked $6,000, wrinkled bills, money orders folded soft from her purse. Every cent she owned in this world. The young teller counted it and would not meet her eyes. Della didn't flinch. She had come to pay what she owed, and she owed it in full. Behind her, 11 of her neighbors stood in a line. They had come to beg, to ask for more days, more time, more mercy from a bank that had run out of all three. And the man they'd come to beg was Preston Vane, the regional officer, in his press suit and his good watch, and he looked at Della paying her whole balance and he said it loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. People like you don't pay in full. They ask for time. Two cruelties in one breath. He called her a beggar. He called her a liar. And Della Hargrove set a dented red coffee tin down on that marble counter, and she opened the lid. And Preston Vane's smirk died on his face. Because inside that tin was not only money. Inside was 6 years of receipts. Every one of them. Kept and dated and saved. And what those receipts proved was about to bring a bank to its knees. If you've ever been treated like a liar just for being poor and honest, this story is for you. So before we go on, subscribe to this channel, because these are the stories they don't want told. And do me one small thing. Comment what city you're watching from. Just the name of your town. I want to see how far this story travels, and I think it's going to travel a long, long way. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Tanner's Bend, Ohio. You won't find it on the big maps. It's a small town in the flat country, the kind of place where the water tower has the high school mascot painted on it, and the same families have lived on the same streets for 3 generations. It was the year Vandergrift Tooling closed its doors. 60 years that plant had run. 300 jobs, gone in a single Friday afternoon. Men who'd given the place their whole working lives walked out to the parking lot holding a cardboard box and a final check, and nobody said much of anything. There wasn't much to say. When a town loses its biggest employer, it doesn't fall all at once. It sinks. Slow, quiet, house by house. Sycamore Street sat on the east end of town. 14 little houses, most of them built after the war. Postage stamp yards. Front porches. Old maples that met over the road in the summer and threw shade on the whole block. It was not a rich street. It never had been. But it was a paid-for street, or close to it, full of people who had worked their whole lives to own one small thing that was truly theirs. Della Hargrove lived in the 7th house down, on the shady side. White, with green shutters. Earl had painted those shutters himself, the summer before he passed. She and Earl had bought that house 22 years back, when they were still young enough to think 22 years was forever. And they had paid on it every single month, through the good years and the lean ones. Through Earl's back trouble, and the winter the furnace died. They never missed. Not once. Earl had been gone 3 years now. Heart, quick, the doctor said, like that was supposed to be a comfort. One morning he was drinking his coffee at the kitchen table, and by afternoon he was gone, and Della had learned what every widow learns, that the world does not stop for your grief. The bills still come. The roof still leaks. The mortgage payment is still due on the 1st, whether the man who used to write the check is in the ground or not. So Della worked. She cleaned houses for the well-off families up on the hill, the ones whose men had been managers at Vandergrift and had gotten out with something saved. Scrubbing floors on her knees at 58, washing other people's windows. And in the mornings, before all that, she worked the early shift at the Blue Willow Diner out on Route 9. Up at 4. Coffee on by 5. Feet aching before the sun was even good and up. She was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix anymore. But she was not ashamed. There is no shame in honest work. Earl had taught her that. Now, There was one thing about Della Hargrove you had to know to understand the rest of this story. It was a small thing. A silly thing, some might say. On the shelf above her kitchen stove sat a coffee tin. Red, once, faded now to the color of an old brick, dented on one side from the time it fell off the shelf. And in that tin, Della kept her records. Every receipt, every canceled check stub, every money order carbon, every scrap of paper the bank or the electric company or anybody else had ever handed her. It was Earl's system. "You keep the tin, Della girl," he used to say, tapping the lid with one thick finger. "Man tells you you didn't pay. You don't argue with him. You just open the tin." Earl grew up poor, poorer than Della even, and his own daddy had been cheated once out of a piece of land because he couldn't prove what he'd paid. It marked Earl. So Earl kept the tin, and after Earl was gone, Della kept it too. It was how she stayed close to him, if you want the truth of it. Every time she folded a receipt and tucked it in that dented red tin, she could almost hear him. Good girl. That's how you do it. She didn't think much about it. It was just habit, just how the books got kept in the Hargrove house. She had no idea, none in the world, that the paper in that tin was going to matter more than anything she'd ever owned. The trouble came in an envelope. It came to all 14 houses on the same day. Della found hers when she got home from the diner, tired, her uniform smelling of bacon grease. It was in the mailbox with the electric bill and a church flyer. Thick paper, the bank's name at the top in blue. Meridian Savings and Loan. She stood on her own front porch and read it twice, and the second time her hands were not quite steady. Notice of default. Notice of intent to foreclose. Because of a review of the loan portfolio. Because of new terms. Because of 100 cold words that added up to one hot fact, the bank was calling the whole thing due. 41 days. In 41 days, the house would go to auction on the courthouse steps, unless the full remaining balance was satisfied. Now Della was near paid off. She had maybe $6,000 left, and a little put by. But 41 days? To find every last dollar? That would clean her out down to the bone, and she was one of the lucky ones on that street. She looked up from the letter, and down the block, she saw it happening all at once. Doors opening, neighbors coming out onto their porches, holding the same blue envelope, the same white face. The Okafors, the young couple in House 4 with the new baby. Renata, the single mother in House 9, who cut hair out of her kitchen. Old Mr. Petrelli across the way, Earl's oldest friend, standing on his porch in his undershirt with the letter shaking in his hand. The whole block. The whole block owed the bank, and the whole block had 41 days. That evening they gathered in Della's front room, because that's where folks had always gathered. Even when Earl was alive, they crowded onto the couch and the kitchen chairs and the floor, and they were scared, and being scared made them loud. How could the bank do this? It wasn't legal. It couldn't be legal. Somebody knew a lawyer's cousin. Somebody had heard the bank had to give you longer than that. And somebody else, quieter, said the thing they were all thinking, that the men who ran things did not lose sleep over people on Sycamore Street, that the plant closing was one blow, and this was the second, and 2 blows was how a town like theirs got knocked down for good. Word had gone around already. There was a man in from the regional office, a specialist, a workout officer they called him, come to help folks find a way through. Some took hope from that. Maybe he'll work with us, they said. Maybe he'll set up payments. That's his job, isn't it? To help. Della didn't say much. She sat in Earl's old chair and listened and poured coffee. But she watched Mr. Petrelli, over in the corner, turning his letter over and over in his hands, and she saw the old man was troubled by something besides the obvious. "What is it, Sal?" she asked him, low, when the others were arguing among themselves. Petrelli shook his head. It's nothing. It's this bank, Della, years now. They've been tacking a charge onto my statement. Insurance, they call it, $112. Every month, like clockwork. Insurance I never asked for. I already got insurance on the place, had it for 30 years, Mourinho down at the agency. But they put their own on there anyway, and made me pay it. He waved a hand, disgusted, some fool clerical thing. You call and call, you get a machine. I gave up hollering about it years back. $112. He said it again, like the number itself was an insult. $112 a month to a man on a fixed pension. Della frowned. They put insurance on your house that you didn't sign for? Every month, Petrelli said. You too, probably, you just never noticed it. But that was the thing. Della had noticed. Della noticed everything that touched a dollar of hers. Because she had to. Because there wasn't a dollar to spare. And she knew, with the flat certainty of a woman who kept receipts, that she had never once paid $112 for insurance she didn't order. She had her own coverage, same as Petrelli, Buckeye Mutual. And every statement the bank had ever sent her, she'd checked against her own figures, and set right in the tin. She didn't say any of this out loud. She just filed it away, the way she filed everything, in the quiet back room of her mind where Earl still kept the books. Something was wrong with this bank. Something more than a hard year and a cold letter. But she didn't chase it yet. She had 41 days and a payment to make, and one thing at a time was how you got through anything. The days ran down. And Della made her decision, and it was pure Della. She would not beg. She would not go stand in a line with her hat in her hand and ask a man in a suit for mercy. That was not in her. She had never in her life owed a living soul a dime she couldn't cover, and she was not going to start by pleading. She had the $6,000. She'd add the little she had put by. And she would go down to that bank and pay the whole thing, right to the last penny, and be done. Owe nobody. Answer to no one. That was the only freedom a poor woman ever really got, and Della Hargrove meant to keep hers. Renata heard about it and came over, worried. Della, don't clean yourself out. Come with us. Come talk to the workout man. Maybe there's a program. Maybe. I'm not asking that man for anything, Della said. But it's everything you've got. Then it's everything I've got. And the house will be mine, and there won't be a soul on earth I answer to. She said it gentle, but Renata knew that tone. Everybody on Sycamore Street knew that tone. There was no moving Della Hargrove once her feet were set. Some called it strength. Some called it pride. In the end, it was the same thing, and it was about to walk her straight into a room full of people who were built to grind her down. The morning she went to the bank, she dressed in her cleaning clothes, because she had a house up on the hill to do right after, and there was no sense in two changes. She counted the money one more time at the kitchen table, the same table where Earl had taken his last cup of coffee. $6,138.44. She knew the figure to the penny because she'd worked it against her own records 3 times. And then, out of habit, out of Earl, she took the dented red tin down from the shelf and put it in her bag. She wasn't sure why. Maybe just so a piece of Earl would be with her. Maybe because a lifetime of his voice was telling her, when you go to deal with the bank, girl, you take the tin. Meridian Savings and Loan sat on the town square, an old stone building with columns out front, built back when banks wanted to look like temples. Inside it was cool and quiet, marble floor, marble counter, the hush of money. And it was full. The whole block, near enough, had turned out the same morning, because the deadline was close now, and the fear had come to a boil. They stood in a ragged line down the middle of the lobby, waiting for their turn with the workout officer, and every one of them held their papers, and every one of them wore the same look. The look of decent people about to ask for something and hate themselves for the asking. Della walked in past them. She didn't get in the line. She went straight to the teller window, to the young woman behind the marble, and she set her bag down and she started laying out the money. Bills first, smooth flat. Then the money orders. Then the last of it in change, counted into a neat little pile. $6,138.44. $2.44. Payment in full on the Hargrove mortgage. She said it plain and quiet. I'd like to pay off my loan. All of it. Today, and that was when the office door opened, and Preston Vane came out. You'd have known him for the boss anywhere. The suit that cost more than a Sycamore Street mortgage payment. The watch. The easy, oiled way he moved, like a man who had never once in his life stood in a line to beg. He came out because there was a commotion at the teller window, a break in the sad, quiet order of the morning, and he did not like breaks in his order. He took in the scene at a glance. The old woman in the gray cleaning smock, the scarf on her head, the pile of small bills and folded money orders, and something in Preston Vane, some cold and certain thing, decided he had this woman figured before she'd said 10 words to him. He'd seen 1,000 like her in 100 towns like this one. He knew what people from streets like Sycamore did. They came in scared. They came in short. They came to spin a hard luck story and ask for time. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and he pitched his voice to Carrie, right across that marble lobby, over the heads of the 11 neighbors standing in the line. Now hold on. Let's everybody understand how this works. He spoke to the room, but he looked at Della. People like you don't pay in full. They ask for time. A little chuckle at the end of it, sharing the joke with nobody. The lobby went dead still. The neighbors in the line looked at their shoes. It was a shameful thing to be lumped in like that, people like you, right out loud, and half of them wanted to sink through the marble floor. But it wasn't said to them, not really. It was said to Della, and Della Hargrove turned from the counter, and she looked at Preston Vane, and she did not sink, and she did not flush, and she did not look away. She reached into her bag, and she took out the dented red coffee tin, and she set it on the marble next to her stacked money. And she took off the lid. I never asked you for time, she said. Her voice was quiet. It didn't need to be loud. The whole lobby was hanging on it. And I never wanted your charity. She tilted the open tin so the light caught what was inside. Not just cash, paper, layers and layers of folded, dated, kept paper 6 years deep. I came to pay what I owe, in full, to the penny, and I have. So the only thing I'm asking you, and here she paused, and the pause was the whole room holding its breath, is who you gave my money to. And for 1 second, one single second, the smirk went off Preston Vane's face, and something cold went across it instead. He didn't know yet what was in the tin, not exactly, but he was a man who had spent his career on the wrong side of a lot of ledgers, and he knew the look of a person holding proof. He recognized it the way a man recognizes the smell of smoke before he sees the fire, just for that 1 second. Then the smooth came back down over him like a shade pulled over a window, and he laughed again. Easier now, and told the teller to process the payment, and told Della that of course her account would be reviewed, that these things took time, that she should go on home and let the professionals sort out the paperwork. But it was too late. The neighbors had seen it. They had all seen Della Hargrove pay her house off, free and clear, while the rest of them stood in a line to beg. And they had heard what that man in the good suit called them, and they had watched an old cleaning woman set a coffee tin on the marble and make a regional officer of Meridian Savings Loan go pale for 1 whole second. Nobody on Sycamore Street would forget that morning. It was the morning something turned. They just didn't know yet how far it would turn, or what it would cost, or that the poor widow with the coffee tin was carrying the one thing that could save every last one of them. Della walked out with her paid receipt in her hand, and her empty bag, and her tin, and she went and cleaned a house up on the hill, on her knees, that same afternoon, because the work was the work, and it didn't wait on drama. But something had lodged in her now, and it would not shake loose. Who you gave my money to. She'd said it in anger, in the moment, but driving home in the dusk, she kept coming back to it, and to Petrelli's voice. $112 every month, insurance I never asked for. And she thought about her own statements, all those years of them, checked and set right, and filed in the tin. And she thought, I never paid that. But somebody did. All of them did. Where did it go? Now here is where the story turns on a second man, and I want you to remember his name, because he matters. Daniel Foss. Daniel Foss was the branch manager at Meridian, the local one, the one who'd been there 30 years, the one who knew every family on Sycamore Street by their first names because he'd grown up 2 streets over. He was near 60. A widower himself, lost his wife to cancer some years back. A quiet man, a decent man at heart, but a scared one if we're honest, and we're going to be honest in this story. Because the plant had closed, and the town was sinking, and jobs for a 60-year-old bank manager did not grow on trees, and so when the regional office started making its moves, Daniel Foss had done the thing that scared decent men do. He kept his head down. He looked away. He told himself it wasn't his place, that the decisions came from above him, that a man had to protect his own living. He had been telling himself that for a year, and it had been eating him alive. He'd been in the lobby that morning. He'd heard what Vane said. People like you don't pay in full. He'd seen Della open that tin. And Daniel Foss knew Della Hargrove. He'd known Earl. Earl Hargrove had helped him move a refrigerator once, 20 years back, for nothing, just because that's what neighbors did. And watching Earl's widow stand there in her cleaning smock and get called a liar by a man like Preston Vane, something in Daniel Foss that had been asleep for a year woke up, and it was ashamed. And it was angry. So that night, after the lobby emptied and Vane went back to his hotel and the lights went down, Daniel Foss stayed. He sat at his terminal in the dark bank, alone, and he pulled up Della Hargrove's full account history. Every posting, every charge, every payment, going back years. He didn't fully know what he was looking for. He just knew he wanted to see, with his own eyes, whether the old woman with the tin had reason for her question. And he found it. There it was, buried in the line items, month after month after month. A charge. Lender-placed insurance. Forced placed, they call it in the trade. Coverage the bank buys on your house and bills you for at a fat markup, when you supposedly let your own insurance lapse. $112 a month. On Della Hargrove's account, on a house that had carried its own good policy, Buckeye Mutual, paid up and current, every single year. Della had never let a thing lapse in her life. There was no gap. There was no lapse. There was no reason on God's earth for that charge to be there. And it wasn't just Della. Daniel Foss sat there in the dark and pulled the next account, and the next, and Petrelli's, and the Okafors, and Renata's, and it was on all of them. The same charge, the same $112 or something near it, forced onto house after house on Sycamore Street, for years, on homes that already had their own coverage. It wasn't a clerical error on one account. You don't make the same error, the same amount, on 14 accounts, for years. That's not a mistake. That's a system. Somebody had set it up on purpose, and it had quietly bled that street of tens of thousands of dollars. And those overcharges had pushed accounts toward the red, made the loans look shakier than they were. And now the same bank that had done the bleeding was calling the whole block into default and lining the houses up for auction. Daniel Foss leaned back in his chair in the empty bank and felt sick. And then he thought about the tin. Because here was the thing, and it was the thing that changed everything. The bank had records too, sure, but the bank's records were the bank's to control. They could be corrected, adjusted, reclassified, lost. Preston Vane and the regional office could make the bank's version of the truth say whatever they needed it to say. But what they could not touch, what they could not reach, was a receipt sitting in a dented red coffee tin on a kitchen shelf on Sycamore Street. The customer side. The proof, kept by the customer's own honest hand, of exactly what she paid, and exactly when, and exactly for what. An unbroken paper trail, 6 years deep, sitting outside the bank's control entirely. Della Hargrove, keeping her silly receipts all these years because a dead man told her to. Della Hargrove was holding the one weapon the bank could not take away. The next day, Daniel Foss did a hard thing. He walked up Sycamore Street after work, in his shirt sleeves, and he knocked on Della's green door. And when she opened it, he stood on the porch, and he told her about the charge, about all 14 houses, about what he'd found in the dark. He was risking his job standing on that porch, and they both knew it. Della listened without a word, her arms folded. And when he was done, she said, $112 a month, for years, on a house I already insured. On your house and 13 others, Daniel said. Della, I'm sorry. I should have. I've known something was wrong for a long time. I told myself it wasn't my place. He looked older than his years, standing there. It was my place. Earl would have said so. At Earl's name, something moved in her face, but she held steady. Why are they doing it? Not the insurance. That's greed. I understand greed. But why call the whole block down for auction when we've been paying? Why would a bank rather take 14 houses than keep 14 paying customers? And that was the real question, wasn't it? That was the second door, opening in the dark behind the first. Because banks like their money. Banks do not, as a rule, want your house. A house is a headache. A house is a lawn to mow and taxes to pay, and a thing to sell in a down market in a sinking town. Unless somebody wanted those houses. Unless somebody had a reason to want the whole block cleared and emptied, and the titles clean, and the people gone. Daniel didn't have the full answer yet, but he'd heard a name floating around the regional office, on Vane's calls, in the language of the foreclosure notices. Crestline Holdings. And a man named Sable. And Daniel Foss had a bad, cold feeling that the reason Meridian would rather bulldoze Sycamore Street than collect on it had nothing to do with banking at all, and everything to do with what that cleared land was worth to somebody who'd already shaken hands on the deal. But that was for later. For that evening, on the porch, there was just the two of them, and the truth laid out between them, and the tin on the kitchen shelf behind Della's shoulder. Della Hargrove looked at the receipt she'd been handed the day before, paid in full, her house free and clear. Hers, safe. She could have stopped right there. That was the thing. She was out. She'd done what she set out to do. She owed nobody. Her house could not be touched. She could have thanked Daniel Foss and closed her green door and let the rest of that street fend for itself, and no one could have blamed her. Not really. She'd fought her own fight and won it clean. But that was not the woman Earl married. She stood in her doorway a long moment, and she looked down the block, at the porch lights coming on, one by one. The Okafors, with their new baby. Renata, cutting hair to keep the lights on. Old Sal Petrelli, Earl's oldest friend, who'd carried a coffin at the funeral. 14 houses. 14 families, being bled and then thrown out, and every one of them holding papers that couldn't fight the bank, because they hadn't kept them, hadn't checked them, hadn't known to. Only she had. Only Della, because of a dead man in a red tin, held proof the bank couldn't erase. And she understood, standing there, that the receipts in that tin didn't just belong to her anymore. They were the only key on the whole street that fit the lock. Daniel, she said slowly, if I've got proof on my account and everybody's account has the same charge, then somewhere, every one of those houses has proof too. Old statements, canceled checks, insurance papers sitting in a drawer or a shoebox or she almost smiled, a coffee tin. They just don't know what they've got, and they don't know how to put it together. But you do, Daniel said quietly. Earl did. And Earl taught me. She looked at the receipt in her hand one more time. Her freedom, her safe way out. Then she folded it and, out of pure lifelong habit, turned and set it in the dented red tin on the shelf, with all the rest. And when she turned back to Daniel Foss on the porch, something had settled in her face. And he knew that look. The whole street knew that look. And there was no moving her now. "Then I guess I'd best go get their receipts," Della Hargrove said. "House by house. And log every one in Earl's ledger, honest, so no man alive can say I fudged $1 of it. And when I've got the whole block's proof in one place," she nodded, "once to herself, I'll carry it to the state myself." Daniel Foss stood on that porch and felt the ground shift under the both of them, because he knew what she was choosing. She was choosing to leave her safe, paid for harbor, and walk back out into the storm for people who, 3 days ago, had only pitied her. She was choosing to take on a regional bank and a man like Preston Vane, and whatever Crestline was, with nothing but a dead man's ledger, and a tin full of receipts, and a stubbornness that would not bend. And 100 miles away, in a glass office, Preston Vane was already on the phone, saying the words that would turn this from a fight into a war. Because he had gone back and looked at the Hargrove account himself that afternoon. He had seen that the old woman's payment had posted, clean and full and undeniable. And he had seen something that made his jaw tighten. That her account, alone on that whole block, had every charge documented, checked, disputed in writing, and matched to the penny. He didn't know yet about the tin's full contents. But he knew Della Hargrove was a loose thread. And Preston Vane had built his whole career on one simple rule about loose threads. You don't tug them, you cut them. The phone call was short. It always is, with men like Preston Vane. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anybody. He just said a few quiet words to a man 100 miles away, and hung up, and went back to his coffee. And that was that. Somewhere in a glass building, a wheel began to turn. But Della Hargrove didn't know about the phone call. Not yet. What she knew was her own kitchen. The smell of it. Coffee gone cold in the pot. The tin on the shelf above the stove, dented red, right where Earl always kept it. She knew the sound her screen door made. She knew the weight of the ledger in her 2 hands. That green cloth ledger Earl had written in for 22 years. His pencil marks still there on the early pages, faded now. But there. She opened it to the first clean page. And she wrote a name at the top. Petrelli. Then she put on her coat. Sal Petrelli lived directly across the street. He'd been Earl's oldest friend. 60 years the two of them had known each other. Boys on this same block back when the elm trees were young. Now the elms were gone, and Earl was gone, and Sal was an old man on a fixed pension. And when he opened his door and saw Della standing there with the ledger, his face just crumpled. "They sent me the blue one," he said. "The envelope. I got it 3 days ago. I've been sitting here looking at it." "I know, Sal. I got one too. You paid yours off. I heard. The whole street heard." He tried to smile and couldn't hold it. "Earl'd be proud." "Then let's make him proud twice," Della said. "I need to see your papers, Sal. All of them. Every statement that bank ever sent you. That charge you were grumbling about. The 112. I need to see it in writing." He let her in. His kitchen was smaller than hers, and darker, and there was one plate in the sink and a single fork. She noticed that. A widower's kitchen. She'd learned to read those. Sal had kept his papers in a shoebox. Not neat, not like Earl's system, but he'd kept them. And that was enough. Della sat at his table and went through them one by one, in the lamplight, and she found it. There it was, $112 a month. Line item. Some months it read one thing, some months another. But it was always there, and Sal had never once signed for it. And Sal had his own insurance, a little policy through the Veterans Hall, paid up, the card right there in his wallet. She wrote it in the ledger. The amount, the date it started, the date on Sal's own policy that proved he never needed theirs. Honest, every line matched to a piece of paper she could hold up in the light. "You want me to say I signed something I didn't sign?" Sal asked her, watching. "No," Della said, and she didn't look up. I don't want you to say one word that isn't true. That's the whole point, Sal. That's the only thing that beats a man like that. He's built his life expecting us to lie or to fold. So we do neither. We just tell the truth, and we keep the receipt. She was at that table 2 hours. When she left, she had 4 pages filled, and Sal stood on his porch and watched her cross to the next house. And for the first time in 3 days, the old man wasn't afraid. He was something else. He didn't have the word for it. But it stood him up straighter. House by house, then, that was the work of it. The Okafors, in house 4, with the new baby. Della held that baby while its mother dug out the bank statements. And the baby grabbed her finger and would not let go, and Della thought about how a child that small had a foreclosure notice sitting on the kitchen counter beside the formula. She wrote their numbers in the ledger with the baby on her hip. Renata, in house 9, who cut hair out of her own kitchen to feed 2 kids alone. Renata had almost nothing, but she had every statement kept in a drawer, because a woman raising 2 children by herself learns fast that paper is armor. And the charge was there for her too, $112 a month. Bleeding a single mother dry, 1 month at a time, for insurance the bank slapped on a house that already carried its own. By the 4th night, Della had them all. 14 houses. 14 names down the ledger in Earl's green book, and beside each name the same ugly number, the same lie repeated 14 times. And beside that lie, in every single case, the proof it was a lie. She never fudged a dollar. Where a family's papers had a gap, she wrote gap, honest, and noted what was missing. She would not hand the state a story. She would hand them a record. And while she worked those 4 nights, Daniel Foss worked too. He came to her back door after the branch closed, the way a man comes who doesn't want to be seen. And it shamed him, the sneaking, she could tell. He was near 60, Daniel Foss, a widower himself, and he'd worn that bank's name on his shirt most of his life. And now he was carrying its secrets out the back in a folder under his coat. The posting records, he said, spreading them on her table beside the ledger. This is our side. Every charge the branch applied. If your neighbor's receipts match these dates, penny for penny, then nobody can say it's a mistake, Della finished. Not 14 times. Not the same amount. Not for 6 years. Not for 6 years, he agreed. They laid the 2 records side by side. Her tin's world and his ledger's world, the customer side and the bank side. And where they touched, the fraud stood up plain as a fence post. He'd bring the coffee, those nights. He noticed she drank it black, the way Earl had. And he started leaving a cup for her at the diner counter too, on the mornings she worked. Just setting it down without a word. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. But she noticed. There's a woman at the state, Daniel said one night. Division of Financial Institutions. Examiner named Priya Menon. She's straight. If we bring her something this clean, she has to look. Then, we bring it to her. Della. He put his hand flat on the folder. You understand what I'm risking. This is the only job I've got. I'm too old to get another. She looked at him a long moment. You understand what I'm risking, Daniel? My house is paid. Free and clear. I could sit right here in this kitchen behind my own paid deed and let the whole rest of this street go under, and not one law on this land could touch me for it. She tapped the ledger. But I'd have to live in that house. With that. He didn't say anything for a while. Earl used to say a receipt's just a promise you can hold in your hand. She went on, quieter. The bank made a promise to every family on this block. Then it lied about it 14 times. I'm just the one who kept the papers. She closed the ledger. So no, I won't sit behind my deed. Get your coat. I want to see this Menon woman with my own eyes. The storm came the day they drove to the state office. It came down Route 9 in gray sheets, the wipers losing the fight, and Daniel drove with both hands tight on the wheel, and Della sat with the tin in her lap, and the ledger zipped inside a plastic bag against the wet. Neither of them talked much. There was a thing between them in that car that neither had a name for, and neither was fool enough to reach for. Two people who'd each buried the person they'd meant to grow old with, sitting close in a small, warm space while the world came apart outside the glass. Once, going around a bad curve, the car slid, and Daniel's arm came across in front of her, out of pure instinct, the way you'd do for someone you meant to keep. He put it back on the wheel. She looked out the window. But she'd felt it, and something in her, frozen 3 years, thawed a half a degree. Priya Menon met them in a plain office, with a plant that needed water. She was younger than Della expected, and tired around the eyes, and she'd clearly heard 100 people swear they'd been wronged by a bank. Her face said as much when they walked in. Then, Della opened the tin, and laid out the ledger, and laid Daniel's posting records beside it. And Menon stopped being tired. She pulled her chair in. She got a legal pad. She started asking the kind of questions you only ask when you've stopped humoring somebody and started believing them. An hour in, she was making photocopies with her own hands. 2 hours in, she said the word Della had been waiting 4 nights to hear. "This is examinable," Priya Menon said. "This is a pattern. I can open a formal review on all 14 accounts. But I have to tell you both," she looked between them, "these things move slow." "Weeks, and I heard you say your auction's in days now," Daniel said. 13 days. "Then pray the paperwork's faster than the bulldozer." She squared the copies. "I'll push it as hard as the rules let me push." "That's a promise." "A promise," Della thought of Earl. "A promise you can hold in your hand." She thanked the woman and picked up her tin and walked back out into the storm, and for the first time she let herself believe it might actually be enough. It wasn't. Not yet. Because 100 miles away, the wheel Preston Vane had set turning had come all the way around. It started with a letter. Everything with them started with a letter. This one didn't go to the whole block. This one came to Della alone, and it was thin and official, and it said her payment, her $6,138.44, paid in cash and money orders across that marble counter in front of 11 witnesses, had failed to post due to a processing irregularity, and that her account was, as of that date, restored to its prior balance and, quote, subject to the pending foreclosure action on the property. Della read it standing at her mailbox. She read it twice. Then she went inside and sat down at her kitchen table and put both hands flat on the wood to stop them shaking. Because this was the thing she'd thought she was safe from. This was the one door she'd believed was bolted. Her house. Her paid, free, clear, receipted house. The house she and Earl put 22 years into. They were reaching right through her paid deed to take it, and they were doing it because she'd refused to stay behind it. That was the all is lost hour. She'll tell you so herself, if you ask her. She sat at that table as the light went down and she did not turn on the lamp, and she thought, plain as anything, I could stop. I could take my tin down to that state woman and pull out only my own papers, my own payment, my own proof, and I could save my one house and let the ledger go. Nobody would blame me. I'm 58 years old. I've got a dead husband and a bad back, and a diner shift at 5 in the morning. Let somebody younger carry it. She sat with that a long time. It was a fair thought. It was an honest thought, and she never was one to lie to herself either. And then she got up, in the dark, and she took the tin down off the shelf. And she held it, and she thought about Sal's one fork in the sink, and the Okafor baby grabbing her finger, and Renata's drawer full of armor, and she put the tin back on the shelf and turned on the lamp. No, she said, out loud, to the empty kitchen. We keep our receipts. Same night, 100 miles the other direction, Daniel Foss was called into an office and handed a pen. The corrected ledger was on the desk. The one that unposted Della's payment. The one that put her house back on the block. Sign off on the correction, the voice on the speakerphone said. Vane's voice, smooth as ever. It's a clerical matter, Daniel. Every manager signs these. You sign a dozen a month. Daniel Foss looked at that pen a long time. He was near 60. It was the only job he had. He'd told Della that himself, in her kitchen, his hand flat on the folder. He had a mortgage of his own, and a pension that hadn't come in yet, and no wife anymore to say it'll be all right. We'll manage. You there, Daniel? I'm here. Sign the correction. And Daniel Foss thought about a woman driving through a storm with a tin in her lap because she wouldn't sit behind her own paid deed while her neighbors drowned. And he set the pen down. Gently, like it was hot. No, he said. I don't believe I will. The line was quiet. That payment posted, Daniel said. I watched it post. I've got the records that say it posted, and I've got a good deal more than that. And I think you know exactly what I've got, Preston, so no. I won't sign your lie. Fire me if you want. I'd rather be fired for the truth than kept on for the other thing. He hung up first. That felt good, hanging up first. He drove straight to Priya Menon's office that night and put the branch's true posting records in her hands. The real ones. The ones that showed Della's money coming in clean and full on the day she paid it. And Della's tin held the customer side, the receipt stamped and dated, the two of them matching to the penny. Retaliation, Menon called it. She used that word and she wrote it down and she moved the whole review up her list. Because now it wasn't just fraud she was looking at. It was a bank punishing a woman for reporting the fraud. And that is the kind of thing that gets a slow wheel turning fast. But the auction was still coming. Days now. And that's when the block did the thing nobody expected. Least of all Della. They came to her porch. It started with Sal, of course, crossing the street the way he'd crossed it 10,000 times to see Earl. Then the Okafors, the baby bundled up against the evening cool. Then Renata with her 2 kids. Then the rest, one house at a time, the whole of Sycamore Street, standing in Della Hargrove's front yard in the blue dusk. The same people who 3 weeks ago had only pitied her, the poor widow in her cleaning clothes, the one who couldn't even ask for help right. We heard what they did, Renata said. Putting your house back on the list. After you paid. After you spent 4 nights walking door to door for us. They can't do that, one of the Okafors said. Can they do that? They can try anything, Della said from her porch step. That's what I've learned. There's no bottom to what a man like that'll try. She looked out at all their faces. But here's the other thing I've learned. They only win if we do it alone. One old woman, they can flag her payment, lose her paperwork, wear her down. 14 houses with every receipt kept and every number matched. She shook her head. That they can't lose in a drawer. There's too many of us holding the same true thing. So what do we do? Sal asked. We show up, Della said. There's going to be a hearing. The state's calling it. And when they hold it, I want every soul on this block sitting in that room. Not to shout. Not to beg. We're done begging. Just to sit there and be counted and let them see our faces while the truth gets read out loud. She stood up. You keep your papers? A murmur. They kept their papers. Every one of them, it turned out, had kept something. Because poor people learn young that paper is the only witness that doesn't get tired and doesn't get scared and doesn't forget. Then bring them, Della said, and we'll see whose records are stronger. Ours, kept honest in shoeboxes and drawers and a dented old coffee tin. Or theirs, kept crooked in a glass building. I know which I'd bet on. The hearing was held in the town hall, in the big room with the tall windows, the same room where Tanner's Bend held its fair every fall back before Vandergrift Tooling closed and took 300 jobs out the door. Now it held rows of folding chairs, and in those chairs sat all of Sycamore Street. The Okafors, the baby asleep at last. Sal Petrelli in the suit he'd married in, 40 years too tight and worn anyway, out of respect. Renata and her 2, scrubbed and quiet. Daniel Foss, not behind a bank desk for the first time in his life. Just a citizen in a chair, sitting near Della, because that's where he sat now. And at the front, a long table. Priya Menon in the middle of it, with a projector, and a thick file, and 2 state officers standing quiet along the wall. Preston Vane came in like he owned the building. Because in his mind he did, or would soon, him and Crestline both. He wore a suit that cost more than Renata cleared in 3 months. And he sat down with his lawyer, and he did not look at the neighbors, not once, the way you don't look at furniture. He glanced at Della exactly 1 time, and he almost smiled. People like you, that glance said, still, even now. Manon began without any speeches. This is a public review of servicing conduct on 14 mortgage accounts held by Meridian Savings and Loan on Sycamore Street, she said. I'm going to show you what the records show. That's all. Just the records. And she turned on the projector. The first slide was simple. A single account. A charge, highlighted, $812 a month, forced placed insurance, applied to a home that already carried its own valid coverage. Beside it, the homeowner's own policy, paid, active, unneeded. She clicked to the next. Another house. Same charge. Another same. She went through all 14, one after another. And the room got quieter with each click. Because you could feel it building, the weight of the same lie stamped 14 times over 6 years, and there was no way on God's earth to call it a clerical error when it was that neat, that identical, that profitable. These charges, Manon said, manufactured the defaults. The homes weren't behind because the families didn't pay. The families were behind because the bank added a charge they never owed, then counted the shortfall as a missed payment, then used those missed payments to move toward foreclosure on all 14 homes at once. In a single mailing. 41 days to auction. Somebody in the rows made a small sound. It might have been Renata. Then Manon clicked to Della's account. And there was the payment, $6,138.44. Posted, clean, dated, and beside it, the correction that unposted it, dated 11 days later. This payment was made in full, Manon said, in cash and money orders, before 11 witnesses, and confirmed by the branch's own posting system. 11 days after this homeowner submitted evidence of the insurance fraud to my office. This payment was reversed, and her paid-in-full home was returned to the auction list. We have the branch's true posting records, provided by the branch manager. We have the customer's dated receipt. They match to the cent. The reversal has no basis in any transaction. It is not an error. It is retaliation. And it is documented. She let that sit. Then she said, I'd like to address the individuals involved, each in turn. And that is where the room changed. That is where the marble turned cold under Preston Vane. Mr. Vane, Manon said, the force-placed insurance program on these accounts was approved and defended under your regional authority, and there is correspondence. She opened the thick file. Emails between your office and a party named Grant Sable of Crestline Holdings, discussing the timeline for clearing Sycamore Street and the price per parcel after clearance. Dated before the foreclosure notices were mailed. Vane's lawyer leaned to say something. Vane waved him off. He was still, for the moment, sure he could stand. He'd built a career on being the one who stood while others folded. You have my emails, he said. And his voice was smooth even then. Taken out of. They're in evidence, Mr. Vane, Manon said. And she wasn't smooth. She was just certain. This isn't the venue for your argument. That venue's coming. This is where I tell you that the matter's been referred for criminal prosecution, and that these 2 officers are going to ask you to step outside now. The 2 officers came off the wall. Quiet, no hands on him. They didn't need hands. One said, "Low, Miss Vane. If you'd come with us, please." And Preston Vane stood up. And for 1 second, the whole block saw it. He looked at Della Hargrove. The poor widow in her clean pressed church dress, sitting straight-backed in a folding chair with a dented red coffee tin in her lap, her hands folded on top of it. And whatever he'd meant to say died in his throat. Because she wasn't gloating. That was the thing that undid him. She wasn't triumphant. She just looked at him steady, the way you look at bad weather that's finally passing. And she said one thing, quiet, the only thing she said to him in that whole room. "I only ever asked who you gave my money to." He didn't answer. There was no answer. He walked out between the two officers, past the rows of the people he'd never once looked at, and the only sound in the whole town hall was a single folding chair scraping the floor as he pushed it back. That scrape. People on that block still talk about that scrape. The sound of a man like that being walked out of a room by the plain quiet weight of the law. Grant Sable never even made it into the building. He was out in the town hall lot in his big clean SUV, waiting on the outcome he was sure of. The cleared block. The rezoning. The flip. His man came out and told him it had gone the other way. All 14 foreclosures reversed. Titles clouded. Deals dead. The whole thing referred to prosecutors with his emails in the file. And Sable did what men like Sable do. He tried to shake hands with the county's man on the way to salvage some piece of it. Offered a revised number for the block, a friendlier one, and the county's man looked at that offered hand and did not take it. Just looked at it. And Sable put his hand back in his pocket and got in his SUV and pulled out of that lot slow, past the survey flags his own crew had staked on Sycamore Street, the little orange flags that were, that very afternoon, being pulled up out of the ground one by the neighbors and thrown in a pile. He drove past them, and he did not slow down, and he did not look, and Tanner's Bend never saw him again. And Meridian Savings and Loan, the institution itself, was ordered to make it whole. All 14 foreclosures reversed on the record. Every dollar of that illegal $112 a month refunded, 6 years of it, to every house on the block, with interest. And Della Hargrove's deed, her paid in full deed. The one they'd tried to reach through, restored on record clean. Hers, the reversal wiped out like it never was. Priya Menon closed her file. And then she did one more thing, and it wasn't in the rules, and nobody stopped her. She said to the whole room, "I want it noted how this came to us. It came because one homeowner kept 6 years of receipts in a coffee tin and wouldn't throw a single one away. And because a branch manager risked his job to hand over the true records." She looked at Daniel. "It's not common. I'll say that plainly. It's not common at all." And here is the part they tell about Della most. Because when it was over, when the neighbors were on their feet, and some were crying, and Sal Petrelli was pumping Daniel's hand, somebody called out for Della to say something, to take the moment, and she stood up with her tin, and she did not take it. "Wasn't me alone," she said. "Don't you go writing it down that way. I kept my papers, sure, Earl taught me that. But my papers only proved my one house. It was Daniel Foss who found the pattern in the dark, and Daniel Foss who wouldn't sign their lie, and near lost his living for it. And it was every one of you, keeping your own papers in your own drawers, that made 14 too many to hide." She held up the tin. "One tin doesn't beat a bank. 14 tins do. You remember that. Whatever comes next in this town, you remember it wasn't the one loud voice. It was all the quiet ones, keeping their receipts, refusing to be called liars." Then she sat down. And that was the last word said at the hearing, and it was the right one. There's an after to this. There's always an after, and this one's worth the telling. 2 days later, Daniel Foss walked into the branch, still had the keys. Turned out they couldn't fire a man that fast, with the state watching, and he did the thing at the counter he'd been waiting to do. He slid Della's restored deed across the marble, the same marble where she'd counted out $6,000 in wrinkled bills, while 11 people watched a man mock her. He slid the deed across, and this time, he met her eyes. Held them. And Della Hargrove set the dented red coffee tin down on the counter between them. Empty. Now, she'd taken the receipts out, every one, filed safe at home. "Don't need it here anymore," she said. "No," Daniel said. "I don't suppose you do." She almost smiled. He did smile. It was a start that, 2 widowed people, at a bank counter, an empty tin between them, both of them a little embarrassed, and neither in any hurry to leave. A start. 1 year on, Sycamore Street has its porch lights on. It's a warm evening, the tail end of summer, and there's a cookout in the street. Tables end to end from house 1 to house 14, the way they used to do before the tooling plant closed and everybody got scared and quiet. The Okafor's baby isn't a baby anymore. She's crawling all over Della's front steps and trying to eat a napkin, and Della keeps fishing it out of her hands and the baby keeps grabbing it back, and they both find this endlessly funny. Up and down the block, if you went house to house, you'd see the same thing framed on kitchen walls. Refund checks. 6 years of $112 a month given back, framed behind glass like a diploma, which in a way it is. Renata used hers to fix her boy's teeth. Sal Petrelli bought a new fork and a whole set of dishes to go with it, and has people over now. The Okafors put theirs toward the babies someday, and in Della's kitchen, by the door, hangs the paid in full deed. And on the shelf above the stove, right where Earl always kept it, sits the dented red coffee tin. Only it doesn't hold money anymore, and it doesn't hold receipts. It holds packets of tomato seeds for the spring, and under those, a thick, soft stack of thank you cards. 14 of them and more, from every house on the street and a few beyond it. She and Sal are on the porch with plates of pie when Sal brings up the man's name. The only time all year anybody said it. "You know what Vane told you, that first day," Sal says. "People like you don't pay in full. They ask for time." Della cuts a bite of pie. Thinks about it. "He was right about one thing," she says. "People like us don't ask for time." She nods, slow, at the tin on the shelf through the window. "We keep our receipts." Sal laughs until he has to set his plate down. It gets dark by degrees, the way it does in Ohio in the summer. The sky going from gold to rose to that deep soft blue, and the neighbors drift home a few at a time, and the porch lights stay on all down the block like they used to. And Daniel Foss comes up the walk at dusk with 2 cups of coffee. Black, the way she takes it, the way Earl took it. He hands her one, sits down on the step beside her. Not too close. Close enough. Neither of them says anything much. Neither of them has to. There's a thing between two people who've each buried the one they meant to grow old with, and found, late and unlooked for, that the heart's got more room in it than they'd believed. Nothing declared. Everything understood. 2 coffees going cool on a porch step, and all the lights on, and the whole block quiet and safe, and theirs. Honesty costs the poor more than it costs anybody. It cost Della 4 nights walking door to door, and a storm on Route 9, and a week not knowing if she'd lose the house she'd already paid for. It costs more. But it's worth more too, and don't let anybody tell you different. The receipt you keep when nobody's asking is the one that saves you when everyone is. That's the whole story. That's the widow who paid in full, and the block that owed the bank, and how the smallest, plainest kind of honesty, the kind that keeps its papers in a coffee tin, turned out to be the strongest thing on the street. If you've been sitting with this one, sitting with a hard month or a lie somebody told about you when you were only trying to do right, I hope Della's tin stays with you. And I'd like to know where you're watching from. Tell me your city down below. I want to see how far this street reaches,